We have spent a lot of time this chapter developing the idea of objects interacting with each other, and when they interact, they are exerting forces on each other. When these forces are exerted, the motion of the object can change. The object is being affected by these forces. In this part of the chapter, we are going to start to look at individual types of forces and how these forces behave. So when we are analyzing an object from a force perspective, when we're looking at its interactions, it is really useful to specifically identify the types of forces acting on it. This is because some of these specific forces follow very specific rules that we can use to predict how these forces are going to work. In this chapter, we are going to be looking at 5 specific types of forces, but we will be adding more in future chapters. But for this chapter, we are going to be focusing on the force of gravity, the force of friction, the normal force, applied forces, and a tension force. Notice each of these types of forces has a specific variable indicator, so Fg for the force of gravity, Ff for friction. Once you learn what these symbols are, you are more than welcome to start to integrate these into your force diagrams because these are commonly accepted variables that can be used to communicate to other scientists what forces are acting on the object. So as we build more force diagrams, start to integrate these symbols into your vector labels. And the big goal of this chapter, be sure to understand how each of these forces work individually, what rules they follow, and also know the equations to calculate the magnitude of these forces if there is an equation. To start out really broad, big picture, there are in general 2 categories for forces. So as a reminder, forces come about as a result of an interaction between 2 objects. 2 real-life physical objects that exist have to be interacting with each other in order for a force to occur. And there are 2 general ways in which objects can interact with each other. The first way is through direct contact. So if the molecules of one object touch the molecules of another object, they are going to interact and exert forces on each other. So this cat can come into contact with the fish, there'll be a force. The human's hand can touch the cat's paw, and there is going to be another force there. Notice it requires direct contact. But there is another way that objects can interact with each other without directly touching each other, and this is through the use of force fields, so gravitational fields, magnetic fields, electric fields. So in this example down here, these magnets, so these are really strong magnets, are interacting with each other, but notice every time the magnet is dropped, they don't actually ever come into contact with each other. They are not actually touching each other, but they are definitely interacting with each other. Every time they drop a magnet, it affects all the ones below it, but it's not doing so through contact. It's doing so through a magnetic field. So this is another way that objects can interact, through direct contact or through the use of force fields. Because these are the 2 methods, we will call these 2 broad categories contact forces, for forces through direct contact, and field forces, forces that work through force fields. This table summarizes pretty much the majority of the forces that we are going to be learning about in AP Physics 1. So under contact forces, we're going to be learning about the normal force, force of friction, applied force, tension force, and air resistance. Under field forces, we're going to be focusing on the force of gravity. So these are the ones that we're going to be covering in this chapter. Later on in this course, in future chapters, we're going to look at the spring force. So this is a force from springs, and the electrostatic force, which is the force generated by charged particles. There's also a magnetic force. This is the one that's shown in this GIF down here through magnets. We do not cover that in AP Physics 1. That is a Physics 2 topic. So if you end up taking AP Physics 2 or you take more physics in college, you will see the magnetic force in that course. So in this section, when we are talking about all of these different types of forces, here are the big things you need to keep in mind. Keep all of the forces separate in your brain. So if we learn specific facts about the force of gravity, don't try to apply those to the force of friction. They are different forces. If there is an equation that we can use to calculate something, know what that equation is. And again, know the rules for how these forces work. Tension is going to work differently than friction, than gravity. Just make sure you clearly know which one is which and which rules apply to which force.